At 60, Keanu Reeves finally spoke about the one woman fans never stopped asking about, Sandra Bullock. He'd been private for decades, careful to protect the few people who truly mattered to him. They met on the set of Speed. In the early 1990s, two rising stars unaware that their connection would outlive the movie itself. Audiences saw the spark immediately. What they didn't see was the quiet friendship that grew when the cameras stopped, or the way Keanu made her laugh when fame began to overwhelm her. Through decades of rumors, near misses, and separate lives, neither ever told the full story. But now Keanu has, and what he revealed surprised even those who thought they knew him best, because the truth about Sandra Bullock wasn't what anyone expected. This is the real story of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, and the truth he finally confessed after 30 years of silence. In the early 1990s, two actors walked onto a film set that would change both of their lives. Keanu Reeves, still carrying the quiet intensity that audiences had seen in Point Break, and Sandra Bullock, an emerging actress whose warmth lit up every frame. The movie was Speed, a high-stakes thriller that became an instant classic. But what unfolded behind the scenes was something far softer, the beginning of a connection that neither of them could fully explain. From the first table read, there was a rhythm between them. Sandra's nervous laughter, Keanu's calm focus, the way he looked at her when she delivered her lines. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't forced. The director noticed it, the crew whispered about it, and the audience would later feel it without ever knowing why. When Speed hit theaters in 1994, their chemistry became one of the most talked about elements of the film. Critics called it electric, fans called it real. Off-camera, Sandra found herself drawn to Keanu's quiet kindness. He was different from the Hollywood personalities she'd encountered. Gentle, deliberate, always listening more than he spoke. Between takes, he'd ask if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she was handling the pressure of such a massive production. She later said she'd never met anyone so considerate. For her, those moments defined him more than any scene they shared. Keanu, meanwhile, saw in Sandra something that grounded him. Her humor disarmed the tension of long days. Her curiosity softened his edges. While he rarely opened up about his emotions, she had a way of making people feel safe, and he wasn't immune to that. There was no flirting, no spectacle, just two people who instinctively trusted each other. In a business built on illusion, that kind of authenticity was rare. When filming wrapped, something lingered. Neither of them said it aloud, but both felt it. The kind of energy that doesn't fade when the lights go out. They went their separate ways. Keanu diving into new projects, Sandra stepping into the romantic comedies that would make her a household name, yet both carried the memory of those months. Years later, Sandra admitted she had a crush on him during filming. She said he never knew. But Keanu, when told about it, only smiled and said he had a crush too. That quiet confession, shared decades later, gave fans the confirmation they'd always suspected, that what they saw on screen had been real. Still, neither acted on it. Timing, circumstance, and the unspoken respect between them kept the line clear. Perhaps that's why their bond endured. Even now, when people rewatch Speed, they can sense something different in their performances. The tenderness behind every glance, the sincerity in every exchange. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was two souls briefly crossing paths, creating something neither of them could replicate again. And for Keanu, that time would remain frozen, a reminder of a rare connection built not on romance, but on mutual care and quiet understanding. After Speed turned into a worldwide hit, their lives began to move in opposite directions. Sandra Bullock became Hollywood's new favorite leading lady, moving from one box office success to another. Keanu Reeves, meanwhile, chased roles that pushed against the industry's comfort zone, eventually disappearing into the intense world of The Matrix. They were both ascending, both beloved, yet rarely in the same orbit again. Still, the connection lingered. Whenever they crossed paths at an event or award show, There was an ease between them that caught people's attention. No awkward distance, no forced smiles, just a quiet recognition of someone who had once meant something rare. Sandra would later say she always felt safe around Keanu, that he carried a gentleness she never forgot. In an industry built on performance, he was one of the few who never pretended. Their timing, however, was never right. When Sandra was single, Keanu wasn't. When Keanu was free, she was involved. Life kept them just out of reach, like two lines that ran parallel but never met. The press occasionally tried to stir rumors, but both stayed silent, refusing to turn friendship into a headline. For Keanu, privacy was a form of protection. For Sandra, it was respect. Over the years, their lives mirrored each other in more ways than either might have realized. Sandra adopted children, built a home outside the chaos of Hollywood, and found purpose in stability. Keanu, marked by personal tragedy and loss, learned to live quietly, avoiding the spotlight unless it served his work. Both of them had seen what fame could take from a person. Both chose to protect what mattered most. Every now and then they'd surface in each other's stories. In interviews, when asked who she admired most in the industry, Sandra's answer was always the same: Keanu. She'd tell small stories, how he once showed up at her door with champagne and truffles just because she'd mentioned never trying them, how he remembered every small detail about people, how kindness seemed effortless to him. She spoke about him the way one talks about someone they never quite stopped caring for. Keanu returned that warmth in his own way. When he spoke of Sandra, his words were brief but weighted. He'd smile, pause, and say, "She's a good person." It wasn't much, but in his world that meant everything. People who knew him said Sandra was one of the few names that softened him instantly. Still, time moved on. Relationships came and went. Careers shifted. But every time Speed resurfaced in conversation, fans would ask the same question: why didn't they ever end up together? Neither answered directly. And perhaps that silence became its own answer. Some bonds were too rare to risk. Even after decades apart, the affection between them never seemed to fade. It wasn't nostalgia or longing, but mutual gratitude, the kind that endures when romance might have burned out. For both Keanu and Sandra, their connection became a reminder of what happens when respect is stronger than timing, and friendship lasts longer than opportunity. By the time Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock reunited for The Lake House in 2006, more than a decade had passed since Speed. Both were older, calmer, and marked by the lives they'd built. The energy between them was no longer youthful excitement, but something deeper, shaped by time and understanding. When they met again on set, it felt less like a reunion, and more like returning to a familiar place that had quietly waited for them. The film itself mirrored their story in uncanny ways. Two people connected across time, trying to find each other but never quite in the same moment. It wasn't just acting. The emotion felt lived in, effortless, real. Crew members noticed how naturally they slipped into sync, finishing each other's thoughts, sharing quiet jokes between takes. Sandra later said she didn't have to pretend with Keanu that everything about working with him felt safe. That word, safe, kept coming up whenever she spoke about him. Keanu, ever private, said little publicly. But those who watched him on set said there was something different in his demeanor when Sandra was around. He listened more intently. He smiled more often. Their scenes carried a softness that can't be rehearsed, as if both were letting their real selves bleed into the story. It was a rare thing in Hollywood, a partnership built on trust rather than pretense. At that time, both were single. Fans hoped maybe finally this was their moment, but they never crossed that line. For them, friendship had become sacred ground. Sandra once explained that she didn't want to lose what they already had, that stepping beyond it could destroy the balance they'd managed to preserve for so long. Keanu seemed to feel the same. He'd lost enough to know how fragile connection could be, how easily it could vanish under pressure. Still, their chemistry in the lake house reignited the conversation that had never truly gone away. Critics noticed the quiet longing in every exchange, the familiarity that made the film's love story feel heartbreakingly real. Audiences left theaters convinced there had to be more behind it. But Keanu and Sandra, true to form, let the rumors swirl and said nothing. Off camera, though, their friendship deepened. They exchanged letters, sent gifts on birthdays, checked in during hard times. Sandra often described Keanu as one of the few constants in her life, someone who asked for nothing, who never needed to be reminded of who she was. He had that effect on people, grounding them, reminding them of their worth just by being present. Years later, when she was asked what she thought of him, Sandra didn't talk about romance or missed chances. She simply said, "He's a good man." Those words carried a quiet finality, the kind that suggests affection unspoken yet deeply felt. And for Keanu, that was enough. Their story didn't need a grand ending. It had already found its meaning in something quieter. Two people who loved each other in the only way they knew how, with respect, distance, and unwavering care. Keanu Reeves has always lived with a kind of deliberate restraint. While others courted attention, he chose silence. Fame didn't interest him. People did. And for Keanu, loyalty wasn't something he performed in public, it was something he practiced quietly, away from cameras, away from headlines. That's why his bond with Sandra Bullock endured long after the world stopped asking about it. Those who know Keanu describe him as someone who values presence over promises. He remembers birthdays, sends handwritten notes, and shows up when others forget. He once rode miles on his motorcycle just to deliver a gift to a crew member who'd mentioned a dream of owning one. It was never for recognition. It was who he was. And it was the same instinct that kept him protective of Sandra long after their time together on screen ended. He never let anyone twist her name into gossip. When tabloids tried to revive old rumors, Keanu said nothing, not to hide, but to shield. In an industry that thrives on speculation, silence can be the kindest defense. Sandra understood that. Their friendship existed in the space between the noise built on mutual respect and the unspoken promise to protect each other's peace. Behind that loyalty was a man shaped by loss. Keanu had seen love slip away in ways that left him cautious, almost reverent. After losing people he loved deeply, he began to value stillness, simplicity, and trust over passion that burned too fast. Sandra represented that kind of peace. She was the rare person who understood the weight of his silences, who didn't need explanations to feel close to him. Through the years, they stayed in touch quietly. He'd check in when she faced personal heartbreak. She'd send messages when he went through grief of his own. There were no grand gestures, no staged reunions, just two people who had learned to care without needing to prove it. For Sandra, that constancy became one of the few things she could depend on in a business built on change. Even when the public longed for them to become something more, Keanu's loyalty kept him steady. He wouldn't risk what they already had. Love to him wasn't always about claiming, it was about honoring. And for decades he honored her by never exploiting what they shared, by letting the truth of it remain theirs alone. That quiet loyalty is what has made Keanu so enduring to audiences around the world. In an age of exposure, he chose privacy. In a culture of spectacle, he chose sincerity. And in all the years since Speed, his respect for Sandra Bullock has never faded, never shifted, never been tarnished by rumor or regret. It's the kind of devotion that doesn't need to be declared. You can see it in his eyes when her name comes up. You can hear it in the pause before he answers. It's the loyalty of a man who knows that not every story needs an ending, because some connections were never meant to fade, only to be cherished quietly. When Keanu Reeves finally broke his silence about Sandra Bullock, it wasn't in a press conference or a headline-grabbing interview. It happened quietly, almost unintentionally, when someone asked him about the one person in Hollywood who still made him smile. His answer was simple, almost hesitant, but it carried the weight of 30 years of wondering. He said he'd always admired Sandra, that they'd shared something rare, something built on kindness and timing, even if life had other plans. It wasn't a confession of lost love, or a secret romance finally unveiled. It was an acknowledgement, tender and true. He confirmed what fans had felt all along: there was something between them. A deep affection that lived in the spaces words couldn't reach. He said they never dated, but that didn't mean there wasn't love. It just took a different form, one grounded in respect, laughter, and genuine care. Sandra once mirrored that sentiment, saying that if they'd ever been together, it might have ruined the bond that had lasted all these years. She smiled when she said it, but her eyes told a different story, a recognition that some connections are too precious to risk. They had both felt it, they had both known it, and that mutual understanding became their quiet secret. For Keanu, admitting the truth wasn't about nostalgia, it was about gratitude. Sandra had been one of the few people who saw him before the fame, before the losses that shaped him. She was part of a time in his life when everything was still possible, when he was still learning how to be vulnerable without fear. In many ways, his words were less about revelation and more about closure, a way of honoring what they shared without rewriting it. When fans heard his remarks, they read between the lines. They saw a man who'd loved deeply, not through romance but through presence. And they saw a woman who'd carried that same affection in her heart for decades. It wasn't the story the tabloids had chased, but it was the truth that love doesn't always need a title to be real. Even now, when Sandra's name is mentioned, Keanu's face softens. He doesn't need to explain why. The world may never know every detail, but the way he speaks her name with quiet warmth and unmistakable respect is proof enough of what she meant to him. After 3 decades of silence, Keanu Reeves finally confirmed what audiences had sensed since that first bus ride in Speed, that Sandra Bullock was and always would be someone special. And perhaps that's the beauty of their story. It never needed to end in heartbreak or reunion. It simply endured, unchanged, untouched, and true. After 30 years, the story of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock still feels unfinished. And maybe that's why it stays with people. There was no betrayal, no fallout, no bitterness to dissect. Just 2 souls who met at the right time, in the right way, and quietly carried the memory with them. In a world where most Hollywood relationships burned fast and bright, theirs endured in silence. When Keanu finally spoke about Sandra, he didn't confess a secret or stir up gossip. He gave something gentler, a glimpse of a truth that had always been there. He spoke of admiration, of respect, of a connection built on trust that never needed to become anything more. And in that honesty, fans saw something they rarely see in this industry: purity. A friendship untouched by fame, unshaken by time, and free of regret. Sandra once said she felt lucky that her path had crossed with his. Keanu, in his quiet way, made it clear he felt the same. Maybe that's all it ever needed to be. Not a grand love story, but a shared moment in time that shaped them both. For Keanu, the truth wasn't about what could have been, it was about what was, and how something so simple could last a lifetime. For more emotional stories, check out this video.